Today's picks from Breakingviews. The departure of Nomura's Jesse Batal spells more bad news for investment bankers. Hungary's choice, disaster or surrender. And why Taiwan's voters should focus on growth, not China. With me is Peter Larsen. Now, Peter, last week, I think it was, maybe the week before, there was a column written at Breakingviews saying RBS, SocGen and Nomura will likely throw in the towel in investment banking in 2012. On the back of this Nomura news, and we had the SocGen internal memo, of course, yesterday. I mean, this is looking increasingly likely.
It is. I mean, and it's not that surprising. I mean, I have to say, first of all, we don't quite know what's going to happen at Nomura, but it's clearly a bad sign that Jesse Batal was one of the ex-Lehman guys that they brought in after the Lehman collapse. They'd put him, it's been a year since he was installed as in charge of the wholesale bank. The fact that he's retired now, we don't quite know the circumstances, but it's probably not good for their ambitions of building a global investment bank. And the danger is that other top people follow him out the door and they go back to being a sort of Japanese brokerage with a few bits and pieces. But the broader context really is not that surprising, which is that, as we know, the investment banking business is under a lot of regulatory pressure, extra capital, and obviously the fee pool is shrinking as well. And that hits everybody, but obviously it hits those players at the margins of the business hardest.
So RBS, SocGen, I know we're spreading this story out a little bit now, but RBS, SocGen and Nomura are the your three picks. Obviously, what we saw at SocGen, this internal memo, the pressure that investment banking faces, that is indicative of what we're going to hear from a lot of the banks this year, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the extra capital charges combined with low revenues, which basically means that suddenly they're faced with these very heavy overheads. But the thing is, some banks will be able to shrink back to, they have a business that they can shrink back to, and they cut bonuses and they cut costs, but they will have a business at the end of it. The thing is, if you're a marginal player and you're trying to compete with the big boys, you have to have all the overhead, but you don't necessarily have the revenue to justify it, and that's where it becomes quite a sort of binary decision. The additional problem for Nomura is that they have a credit rating problem, which makes it actually harder for them to compete with some of the big trading houses as well.
Okay, no doubt we'll talk much more about this. Maybe some of these guys will be in Davos as well, so we can try and...
or maybe not.
Or maybe not, sorting out their problems at home. Hungary, disaster or surrender are the options, you say. I mean, this is a bit of a deadlock, isn't it? Because the IMF wants this central bank independence, but looks like they can't have it.
Yeah, so I think it's exactly a deadlock. And normally in these situations you have some sort of compromise, and the IMF would sort of look the other way and sort of hold its nose, but provide some financial assistance to a regime that's not necessarily terribly savoury. The problem here is that the aid is conditional on the government rolling back, particularly these laws that compromise the independence of the central bank. And so basically it depends, it requires Hungary to back down, but there are, if Hungary doesn't back down, if the worst happens, you have a sort of messy default in Hungary, the knock-on effects can be quite serious. Austrian banks are quite exposed, Italian banks are quite exposed, and if you have a knock-on to Austria, you could potentially then have a downgrade of Austria, which then makes the whole Eurozone problem much worse. So it's coming to a crunch.
Okay, and then very quickly, quick word on Taiwan and the elections there. And you say voters should focus on growth, not on China. Yeah,
I mean, President Ma is sort of the big debate is about sort of kind of greater engagement with China. President Ma's keen, the opposition party are not so keen, and that's likely to dominate sort of a lot of the discussions. But we think actually the bigger issue for Taiwan is to make sure that it continues to grow, and the danger is actually that President Ma gets re-elected, but loses the majority in the parliament, and then you have a sort of stagnation and an inability to pass the policies that are needed to stimulate growth.
Okay, very good, Peter. Many thanks for that. For more agenda-setting insight, watch our US show every day, 12:30 Eastern, 17:30 GMT. I'm Axel Threlfall. This is Reuters.